Dakota Territory, 1873. A land where opportunity and danger traveled the same dusty trails, where a family's dream could flourish under vast skies or vanish with the cruel efficiency of a winter storm. For the Whitfield family, the untamed prairies represented hope, a chance to claim their own parcel under the Homestead Act and escape the overcrowded tenements of Philadelphia. 8-year-old Sarah Whitfield had spent 2 grueling months watching the landscape transform from lush eastern woodlands to endless rolling plains dotted with wildflowers. The Richardson wagon train, 24 settlers bound by common purpose and uncommon courage, had welcomed the Whitfields despite their last-minute addition to the company. No one could have anticipated the treachery that waited for them in the shadow of those distant bluffs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning dew glistened on the tall prairie grass surrounding their camp as Sarah collected wild strawberries along the perimeter. Dawn had just broken, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold that promised another clear summer day. The wagons stood in their familiar protective circle, a fragile island of civilization on the ocean of grass. Most of the travelers were still asleep, except for Mr. Richardson himself, who had taken the final watch of the night. He sat near the remnants of last night's fire, rifle across his knees, his weathered face bearing the lines of someone who had crossed this country before. Sarah's small fingers worked quickly, plucking the tiny red fruits and placing them carefully in the fold of her apron. Her mind wandered to the little carved wooden horse her father had promised to finish for her younger brother's birthday. Little Jacob would be turning 5 tomorrow. Despite weeks of difficult travel, their mother had saved a precious tin of blackberry preserves to mark the occasion. Such simple treasures seemed monumental after the hardships they'd endured on the trail. "That's a fine collection you've got." "There, Miss Sarah," Mr. Richardson called softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Your mamma will be mighty pleased to have those for breakfast." Sarah nodded, gathering her bounty more securely in her apron. At 8 years old, she considered herself practically grown and took pride in contributing to the daily work of survival. 2 months on the trail had transformed her from a city child into someone who understood the value of each water source, the warning in a darkening sky, the quiet joy of finding wild food to supplement their dwindling supplies. The first gunshot exploded through the morning quiet like thunder from a clear sky. Sarah instinctively dropped to the ground, the strawberries tumbling forgotten from her apron. More shots followed, then screams, high, terrified sounds that sent ice through her small body. Through the swaying grass, she could see riders charging into the circle of wagons, at least 12 men with bandanas pulled over their faces, firing methodically into the camp. Mr. Richardson's warning shout was cut short by a bullet. The old guide collapsed beside the unlit morning fire, his rifle falling uselessly from his hands. The Murphy family scrambled from their wagon, Mr. Murphy pushing his wife and 3 children toward a shallow ravine behind them. A rider spotted them, wheeled his horse, and cut them down before they'd made it 10 yards. Their bodies crumpled in a terrible heap, white nightclothes blooming red in the strengthening morning light. Sarah pressed herself flat against the earth, one hand covering her mouth to stifle her sobs. She was 30 yards from the nearest wagon, concealed in the high grass that bordered their campsite. The massacre unfolded with horrific clarity. Mrs. Taylor dragged screaming from her wagon. The Wilson boys gunned down as they tried to reach their father's shotgun, a baby wailing until its cries were suddenly, sickeningly silenced. The attackers moved methodically, killing first, then looting. They took only what was valuable and easily transported: money, jewelry, weapons. They didn't bother with food stores or personal effects. This wasn't desperation, it was calculated predation. "Check the perimeter," a deep voice commanded. "Make sure we got everyone." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She inched backward through the grass, moving with painful slowness away from camp. The morning dew soaked through her dress, the earth's chill seeping into her bones. 20 yards, 40. The sounds of destruction continued behind her. When she judged herself far enough away, Sarah risked rising to a crouch. The grass stood taller than her bent form, providing cover as she navigated toward a stand of cottonwoods that lined a nearby creek. Each step was agony, her small body shaking so violently she feared the trembling might give away her position. Horse whinnied uncomfortably close. Sarah froze. "Nothing over here, Jackson," a voice called, no more than 15 yards from where she stood, paralyzed with terror. "Get back then. We're burning the wagons." Sarah remained motionless until the hoofbeats receded, then continued her painstaking retreat toward the trees. By the time she reached the cottonwoods, black smoke billowed into the morning sky. The attackers had set fire to the wagons, erasing evidence of their specific crimes, though not the broader atrocity. From the relative safety of the trees, Sarah watched as the murderers mounted up and rode northwest, their saddlebags heavy with stolen valuables. Only when they disappeared over a distant rise did she allow herself to collapse against a tree trunk, her small body convulsing with silent sobs. Hours passed before she found the courage to return to what remained of the camp. The wagons still smoldered, reduced to blackened frames and ash. Bodies lay where they had fallen, their vacant eyes staring skyward. Sarah moved among them like a ghost, searching desperately for her family. She found her father first, fallen near their wagon with his hunting knife still clutched in his hand. He had managed to wound at least one attacker, judging by the blood trail that led away from his body. Her mother lay nearby, her body curved protectively around Jacob, her little brother's half-finished wooden horse still clutched in his tiny hand. Their stillness told Sarah everything her 8-year-old mind didn't want to accept. In a haze of shock, she gathered what supplies she could salvage: a canteen half full of water, her father's hunting knife, a singed blanket, and a small tin of matches from the chuck wagon. She couldn't bring herself to take anything else from the dead. The vastness of her predicament settled over her as she stood amid the devastation. She was alone, a child in hostile territory, at least 60 miles from the nearest settlement, according to Mr. Richardson's last report. Summer would soon give way to fall, and the Dakota winters were legendary in their brutality. If the elements didn't kill her, starvation would. Or perhaps the attackers would return to ensure no witnesses remained. Yet beneath the crushing weight of circumstance, something hardened in young Sarah Whitfield. Her father's words from the previous night echoed in her mind. "Remember, little Robin, Whitfields don't surrender. We face what comes and find a way through." With the meager supplies bundled into the blanket, Sarah studied her surroundings. The Richardson train had been following the North Fork River eastward, planning to connect with a larger trail that would take them north to their land claims. Logic dictated she should continue east toward Fort Thompson, but the attackers had ridden northwest. East would be the first place they'd look if they suspected a survivor. Sarah turned her face southward toward a line of bluffs her father had pointed out days earlier. Rough country, he'd said, but with natural shelters, game, and fewer travelers. Something about those distant rises called to her now, not just the promise of concealment, but of height. From those bluffs, she might see for miles, might spot approaching danger before it found her. She took a final look at the charred remains of the camp, silently promising her family that she would survive to tell of what happened here. Then, with the sun high overhead, Sarah turned her face southward and began to walk. The first day passed in a fog of shock and physical strain. Sarah forced herself to move at a steady pace, rationing sips from the canteen, gathering wild onions and dandelion greens where she found them growing. As dusk approached, she sought shelter beneath an outcropping of rock, wrapping herself in the salvaged blanket against the night's chill. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by nightmares of the morning's horror and the very real sounds of wildlife moving in the darkness beyond her shallow shelter. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their cries echoing across the empty prairie. Dawn brought no comfort, only the stark reality of another day of survival. Sarah's feet, encased in sturdy but worn boots, developed painful blisters that burst and reformed with each mile. Her small bundle grew heavier as the day progressed, though it contained almost nothing. The meager rations she had salvaged would last perhaps another day if carefully measured. Yet she pressed on, counting each step as a small victory against death. By the third day, Sarah's situation had grown dire. The canteen held only a few precious swallows, though she had found a small spring that morning where she could refill. Food, was the greater concern. She had finished the last of her salvaged supplies that morning and had found little to forage along the day's journey. Hunger gnawed at her insides, making her steps unsteady and her thoughts increasingly muddled. The weather, too, had turned against her. Dark clouds gathered over the prairie, bringing an unseasonable cold front down from the north. The first raindrops hit as Sarah struggled up a rocky slope. Within minutes, the drizzle became a downpour. Her clothes, already tattered from days of wilderness travel, offered little protection against the deluge. The blanket wrapped around her shoulders grew sodden and heavy. Her hair hung in dripping tendrils around her face, and her teeth chattered uncontrollably. "Keep moving," she commanded herself. "Just keep moving." But toward what? The question haunted her with increasing urgency. Fort Thompson remained days away, perhaps a week at her current pace. In her weakened state, with dwindling resources and worsening weather, the odds of reaching it diminished with each passing hour. As afternoon faded toward evening, the rain finally relented, though the skies remained threatening. Sarah found herself on a high ridge overlooking a deeply carved valley. The terrain ahead appeared increasingly steep and broken, less hospitable than the slopes she had already traversed. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Sarah gripped a boulder, waiting for it to pass. When it didn't, when, in fact, it intensified, a new fear took hold. Her vision began to blur at the edges. The distant bluffs seemed to waver and dance. When the spell subsided slightly, Sarah raised her head and studied the broken landscape ahead. Continuing blindly forward no longer seemed possible. She needed shelter, a place to recover her strength before the coming night brought even colder temperatures. It was then that she noticed the narrow opening in the ridgeline, just 30 yards ahead, a dark shadow against the grey stone that suggested a cave, or at least a deep overhang. With renewed purpose, she forced her trembling legs to carry her forward. The opening proved to be the entrance to a small cave, no more than 12 feet deep, but blessedly dry. The floor was sandy with scattered stones, the ceiling high enough for her to stand upright. Most importantly, the entrance was partially screened by a stunted oak, making it all but invisible from more than a few yards away. Sarah collapsed inside, her strength completely spent. The soggy blanket offered meager protection against the cave's chill, but at least she was out of the wind and rain. She curled into herself, shivering uncontrollably, her mind clouding with the combined effects of exhaustion, hunger, and fear. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Just for tonight," she whispered to herself. "Just rest tonight and keep moving tomorrow." But as darkness claimed the prairie and the temperature plummeted further, a new realization formed in her exhausted mind. This cave offered something she desperately needed, not just shelter for a night, but security. From its recessed entrance, she could see approaching danger without being seen. The scattered trees below provided both concealment and potential food sources. A small stream gurgled just 20 yards downslope, offering clean water. Perhaps, she thought as consciousness began to fade, the wisest path wasn't to keep moving blindly forward, but to secure a defensible position, to build strength, to survive long enough for help to arrive, or for the attackers to abandon their search, assuming they even suspected a survivor. "I'll stay," she murmured, the decision crystallizing as sleep overtook her. "Just until I'm stronger, just until it's safe." She couldn't know, as consciousness fled, that this simple decision, born of desperation and childish logic, would shape the coming months in ways she could never have imagined, that her temporary refuge would become a prison of fear and isolation, that the cave on the bluff would both preserve her life and slowly erode her humanity, or that after months of solitude, her fate would rest in the hands of a stranger whose own life had been shaped by similar violence. A half-Lakota outlaw, with reasons of his own to hunt the men who had destroyed everything Sarah Whitfield had ever known. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months. Sarah's temporary shelter had become a permanent refuge against the increasingly harsh conditions. Her initial panic had transformed into a rigid routine of survival that sustained her body, while her spirit retreated deeper into itself. The cave now bore the markings of extended habitation. A crude door of interwoven branches covered the entrance, keeping out the worst of the prairie wind. Inside, a bed of dried grasses and leaves occupied the deepest recess. A small fire pit sat near the entrance, positioned so the smoke would drift outward rather than filling the cave. Stacks of kindling lined one wall, while roots, dried berries, and strips of jerky hung from a makeshift rack fashioned from stripped willow branches. November had brought the first snow to the Dakota. Prairie, blanketing the landscape in treacherous beauty. The white expanse made travel nearly impossible, but it also granted Sarah an unexpected gift, the ability to spot tracks around her sanctuary. Each morning, she carefully swept away any sign of her presence and studied the area for prints that weren't her own. So far, only deer, rabbits, and the occasional coyote had passed near her hiding place. Of the attackers, there had been no sign since that terrible August day. Sarah had changed in ways both visible and hidden. Her once soft hands had grown calloused from gathering firewood and crafting primitive tools. Her face, previously round, with childhood softness, had thinned, revealing cheekbones that seemed too pronounced for an 8-year-old. Her clothing, patched with strips of rabbit fur and plant fibers, hung loosely on her frame, despite her efforts to maintain her strength. The most profound changes, however, lay beneath the surface. The talkative, curious girl who had left Philadelphia with wide-eyed excitement had receded into watchful silence. Even alone, she rarely spoke aloud, as if her voice itself might betray her location. Her movements had acquired a predator's stealth, her ears attuned to the subtlest sounds of the prairie. She had become a creature of the wilderness, more comfortable with the rustling of field mice and the calls of hawks than with memories of human interaction. Today marked the beginning of December, according to the notches carved in a stick beside her bed. 4 full moons had passed since the massacre. 4 months of solitude, of walking the razor's edge between survival and surrender. The morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Sarah's breath hung visible in the air inside her cave as she carefully banked the embers of her small night fire. Winter had depleted her food stores faster than anticipated, and today she would need to venture farther than usual to check her snares and gather what meager sustenance the frozen prairie might offer. She pulled on layers of clothing, her original dress, now reinforced with fur linings, covered by a crude poncho made from the salvaged blanket. Her feet were wrapped in rabbit skins inside her increasingly fragile boots. Her father's hunting knife hung at her waist, its blade worn from constant use, but still serviceable. From a leather thong around her neck hung a small metal button, her brother's, the only personal item she had allowed herself to keep. Sarah stepped from the cave into the brilliant morning, momentarily blinded by sunlight, reflecting off fresh snow. She secured the branch door behind her, then carefully began to obscure her tracks as she moved down slope toward her nearest snares. The first two traps were empty. The third had been disturbed by some larger predator that had stolen her catch. The fourth, set in a sheltered hollow where tender shoots still pushed through the snow, held a small rabbit. Sarah whispered a word of thanks as she freed the animal from the snare and swiftly ended its suffering. The rabbit was thin, but its meat would sustain her for 2 days at least, and its fur would repair the increasingly worn lining of her mittens. She was checking her fifth and final trap when she noticed something that froze her blood. A set of tracks that didn't belong to any animal she recognized. Human tracks, boot prints, and they were fresh, cut clearly into the morning's new snow. Sarah dropped to a crouch behind a fallen log, her heart hammering against her ribs. For long minutes, she remained motionless, scanning the prairie with the intensity of prey, sensing a predator. The landscape maintained its winter stillness, giving no sign of the intruder's presence or direction. The tracks led toward the stream where she gathered water, then continued upstream toward the neighboring valley. They weren't the distinctive, heel-marked boots worn by the attackers, but rather the imprint of moccasins with hardened soles, the footwear of someone who walked the prairie regularly, someone familiar with the terrain. A trapper, perhaps, or a native scout. Neither possibility offered comfort. Trappers were often rough men who lived beyond the reach of law, while relations between settlers and native tribes remained tense throughout the territory. Anyone finding a white child alone on these plains would ask questions she couldn't safely answer. Sarah backed away from the tracks, abandoning her final trap unchecked. She moved with painful caution, taking a circuitous route back to her cave, doubling back multiple times to ensure she wasn't followed. She paused frequently to listen, straining her ears for any sound that didn't belong to the natural rhythm of the prairie. By the time she reached her sanctuary, the winter sun had passed its zenith. She slipped inside, securing the door more thoroughly than usual, then retreated to the deepest shadows of the cave. Her hands trembled as she skinned the rabbit, her mind racing with newfound fear. 4 months of vigilance, and now this. It couldn't be a coincidence. Someone was searching these plains deliberately. That night, Sarah didn't light her fire despite the biting cold. She wrapped herself in every layer of clothing and fur she possessed and huddled in darkness, listening to the wind moan across the prairie outside. Sleep evaded her entirely, her mind conjuring scenarios each more terrifying than the last. The next morning brought heavy clouds and the promise of more snow. Sarah ventured out only far enough to confirm that no fresh tracks surrounded her cave, then retreated inside to wait out the coming storm. The snowfall began mid-morning, a gentle curtain that gradually transformed into driving sheets of white. By evening, nearly a foot of fresh powder had accumulated, effectively erasing all signs of human passage from the prairie. For 3 days the storm raged, delivering the heaviest snowfall Sarah had experienced since seeking refuge in the bluffs. When the skies finally cleared, the landscape had been transformed into an alien terrain of deep drifts and buried landmarks. Moving through this new topography would be exhausting and dangerous, but it also granted a temporary reprieve from discovery. No one, regardless of their tracking skill, could follow her now buried trail. Nevertheless, Sarah redoubled her precautions. She ventured from the cave only when absolutely necessary, abandoned her more distant snares, and gathered water from melted snow rather than visiting the stream. She maintained her vigilance, studying the area around her shelter each morning and evening for any sign of intrusion. For 2 weeks, she detected nothing unusual. The boot prints remained buried beneath layers of snow and ice, and no new tracks appeared in the vicinity of her shelter. Gradually, Sarah began to extend her movements again, driven by the increasing scarcity of food in her immediate surroundings. Her daily routine had evolved with the passing months. Mornings began with careful observation of her surroundings, followed by checking snares and gathering whatever edible plants had survived the winter freeze. Midday was devoted to maintenance, repairing her clothing, crafting tools from bone and wood, preparing food for storage. Afternoon she spent gathering firewood and fresh water. Evenings, before the early winter darkness made movement dangerous, she would reinforce her defenses, brushing away tracks and ensuring her cave entrance remained well concealed. With each passing week, Sarah's knowledge of the land had deepened. She had learned which roots could be dug from beneath the snow and eaten, which tree bark could be stripped and chewed for sustenance when nothing else was available. She had discovered that certain berries, dried and stored properly, would last through winter, providing precious vitamins her body craved. Most importantly, she had developed an intuitive understanding of the rhythm of the prairie, the sounds that signaled danger versus those that were merely part of the natural chorus of wind, wildlife, and weather. This hard-won wilderness knowledge had kept her alive, but the cost had been steep. Hunger was a constant companion. The physical demands of survival in winter conditions had whittled her small frame to wiry toughness, burning away any childish softness. Worst was the isolation, the unending silence, broken only by her own movements and the sounds of the natural world. Sometimes, in her darkest moments, Sarah would whisper her family members' names aloud, desperate to hear any human voice, even her own. It was during one such moment of vulnerability, nearly 3 weeks after spotting the mysterious tracks, that disaster struck. Sarah sat in her cave, hands extended toward the small fire, murmuring a fragmented memory of a song her mother had sung during their journey west. The comfort of the remembered melody had distracted her from her usual vigilance. A subtle shift in the quality of light at the cave entrance was her only warning, a momentary shadow where there should have been none. Sarah froze, the half-sung verse dying in her throat. Slowly, without moving her head, she shifted her gaze toward the woven branch door. Through the gaps in the branches, she could see a figure standing utterly motionless, watching her with the stillness of a wolf assessing its prey. The figure was clearly a man, broad-shouldered and imposing. He wore a fur-lined buckskin jacket, adorned with beaded patterns. His dark hair hung in 2 long braids, decorated with small metal ornaments that caught the winter light. His copper skin and distinctive clothing identified him immediately as one of the native people who had inhabited these plains long before white settlers arrived. Their eyes met through the gaps in the branch door. Sarah's instinct screamed at her to run deeper into the cave, but experience had taught her the futility of flight. There was no back exit, nowhere to hide in the small space she had called home for months. Instead, she slowly rose to her full height, her father's hunting knife now gripped in her right hand, her eyes never leaving the watcher's face. For a long moment, neither moved. They remained locked in mutual assessment, prey and predator, survivor and discoverer, child and adult. Yet something in the man's posture suggested he was as surprised by the encounter as she was. "I mean no harm, little one," the man called in accented but clear English, his deep voice carrying easily through the branch door. "You are far from safety here." Sarah remained silent, her knife held before her in what she knew was a pathetic defense. Her eyes darted briefly around the cave, calculating what few options remained to her. "There are worse dangers in these plains than me," the man continued, making no move to approach. "I have tracked your movements for many days. You hide well for a white child, but winter is harsh, and you grow weaker. Leave me alone," Sarah finally responded, her voice rough from disuse, barely above a whisper. "I don't need help." A trace of something, perhaps amusement, perhaps respect, flickered across the man's stoic features. Your snares are empty. Your clothing thins. Winter grows deeper. Alone you may not survive it. As if summoned by his words, Sarah noticed the dark bank of clouds building in the distance. Another storm system, perhaps even more severe than the last. Her food stores were critically low, her firewood nearly depleted. She had planned to spend the day gathering both. The stranger seemed to read her thoughts. I make camp in the valley below. Food, fire, shelter. He paused, then added with surprising gentleness, no questions asked until you wish to speak them. Why would you help me? Sarah demanded, her voice stronger now, edged with the suspicion that had kept her alive for months. I have lost a daughter, the man replied simply. You have lost a father. Perhaps the Great Spirit brings us together for a purpose. The statement struck Sarah with unexpected force. How did he know about her father? Had he somehow visited the massacre site, or was it simply a logical assumption about a child alone in the wilderness? Before she could respond, a distant sound reached them both, the faint but distinctive crack of a rifle shot echoing across the valley from the western plains. The man's head turned sharply toward the noise, his body tensing visibly. Bad men hunt these plains, he said, his voice lower, more urgent. Men who wear one face but show another. Men who kill without honor. He looked back at Sarah, his dark eyes intense. Same men who attacked wagons, perhaps. A cold that had nothing to do with the winter air seeped into Sarah's bones. The attackers, they had returned to the territory. How do you know about that, she asked, her knife hand trembling slightly. Found burnt wagons months ago. Found bodies. His expression revealed a controlled anger. Found tracks of men who dress as Lakota, but are not Lakota. Sarah's mind raced. If the stranger had found the massacre site, he knew far more about her than she had realized. Yet he had made no attempt to capture or harm her during the weeks he'd apparently been tracking her movements. Who are you? She finally asked. I am called Two Hawks, he answered, half-blood son of Lakota mother, white father, now outlaw both peoples. He paused, then added with grim determination, hunter of men who killed innocent families and blame Lakota for the deed. Another rifle shot sounded closer this time, followed by a third. Not hunting shots, they came too close together, too deliberately spaced. Someone was signaling across the valley. Two Hawks' expression hardened. They sweep the plains, looking for something or someone. His gaze fixed on Sarah with new intensity. You saw their faces. You are a witness to their crime. The realization struck Sarah with terrible clarity. The attackers weren't simply passing through the territory again. They were hunting her. Perhaps they had counted bodies at the massacre site and found one missing. Perhaps they had discovered signs of her escape. Whatever the reason, they were methodically searching the bluffs, and the approaching storm would soon force her from the relative safety of her cave as food and firewood ran out. Two Hawks seemed to read the shifting calculations on her face. Choose quickly, young one, he said. Storm comes, hunters come. I offer protection but cannot wait long. Sarah's world narrowed to this impossible choice. Trust this stranger from a people she had been taught to fear, or face both the killers and the storm alone. The knife in her hand suddenly seemed pitifully inadequate against either threat. How do I know you're not with them? She demanded, a final, desperate question. Two Hawks' expression shifted subtly, revealing a depth of pain that resonated with her own. Men who killed your family killed mine also, he said simply, used soldier uniforms when they attacked my mother's camp, wore feathers and paint when they attacked white wagons, create war between peoples who might otherwise live in peace. He slowly extended his open hand, palm upward, a universal gesture of offering. I hunt for justice, not children. Come or stay. Your choice, but choose now. A fourth rifle shot cracked through the prairie, close enough to send birds scattering from nearby trees. The decision crystallized in Sarah's mind with sudden clarity. After months of isolation, months of trusting nothing but her own instincts, she recognized the truth in Two Hawks' words, in his eyes that carried the same haunted shadows she saw in her own reflection. She took a single step forward, then paused. "If you betray me," she said with quiet intensity, "I'll kill you in your sleep." For the first time, a genuine smile crossed Two Hawks' weathered face. "Strong spirit," he commented with approval. "Good. You will need it for what lies ahead." As the dark storm clouds gathered on the horizon and the distant sounds of the searching party grew closer, Sarah Whitfield took her first tentative steps toward the half-Lakota outlaw. With each step, she left behind a piece of the solitary creature she had become, and moved toward an uncertain alliance that would challenge everything she had been taught to believe about the frontier. About native peoples, and about her own capacity for courage, neither could know as they disappeared into the snow-covered landscape that their unlikely partnership would eventually unravel a conspiracy that stretched from the highest levels of territorial government to the blood-stained hands of men who profited from hatred between peoples. Or that the witness and the warrior, bound by shared tragedy, would become the unlikely architects of a justice both had abandoned hope of ever finding. The journey to Two Hawks' camp tested Sarah's endurance beyond anything she had faced during her months of solitary survival. They traveled in tense silence, moving with deliberate care through the prairie to avoid leaving obvious signs of their passage. The half-Lakota outlaw set a demanding pace, occasionally pausing to listen or to obscure their tracks, but never slowing for Sarah's benefit. Pride kept her from complaining. After surviving alone for so long, she refused to appear weak before this stranger who had disrupted her isolation. Despite her determination, the strain showed in her labored breathing and increasingly unsteady steps as the afternoon stretched on. After 2 hours of relentless movement across the snow-covered terrain, Two Hawks finally halted at the edge of a narrow ravine. He studied Sarah's exhausted form with an appraising gaze. "Rest," he said simply, gesturing to a fallen cottonwood. Sarah sank onto it gratefully, though she maintained her vigilance, keeping the hunting knife visible in her lap. Two Hawks ignored the implied threat, kneeling instead to examine her makeshift footwear with unexpected concern. "White man's boots not made for prairie," he observed, noting how the rabbit fur wrappings had worn through in several places, exposing blisters and raw skin beneath. "Need proper moccasins." From his pack, he produced strips of softened deerskin and a small pot of strong-smelling salve. Without asking permission, he began applying the medicine to her feet. Sarah tensed at the contact, but allowed it, recognizing the practical necessity. "Bear fat and sage," Two Hawks explained as he worked, "helps healing, keeps infection away." His unexpected gentleness confused Sarah. The newspaper stories in Philadelphia had portrayed Indians as savages lacking civilized sensibilities. Yet here was this man treating her wounds with the careful attention her mother might have shown. "Why? Did you come alone?" she asked, breaking her self-imposed silence. "Wouldn't your people help hunt these attackers?" Two Hawks' hands paused momentarily. "Some things must be proven before spoken," he replied. "Tribal elders are wise but cautious. White men who speak against other white men are often not believed. Half-blood who accuses whites of wearing feathers to blame Lakota." He shrugged eloquently. "Even less likely to be believed." "Need evidence," Sarah finished. "Need a witness." His dark eyes met hers with surprising intensity. "Need truth that even the Dakota Territory governor cannot ignore." The implication was clear. Sarah was not simply a child he had found in the wilderness, but potentially a valuable ally in his quest for justice. The realization should have frightened her. Yet it carried a strange comfort. For months, her survival had seemed pointless, disconnected from any larger purpose. Now her continued existence might serve as testament to a truth others sought to bury. As Two Hawks finished wrapping her feet in the deerskin strips, a question formed in Sarah's mind, one that had haunted her since their first encounter. How long were you watching me before you showed yourself? A hint of respect flickered across his stoic features. 10 days, found your cave shelter during the first big snow, tracked your movements, studied your patterns. He secured the wrapping. With a practice knot, you survive well for a child, better than many grown men. Sarah wasn't sure whether to feel violated or flattered by his surveillance. You could have approached earlier. Trust must be earned, he replied simply. Needed to know if you run. To attackers or from them. He rose to his feet, gathering his pack. Rest done. We move now. They continued downward, through increasingly dense stands of cottonwoods, the prairie air warming slightly as they descended into a sheltered valley. Sarah noticed how Two Hawks moved, not with the crashing directness of white hunters she had observed from her cave, but with a fluid efficiency that seemed almost part of the landscape itself. He taught without words, his movements demonstrating the proper way to place feet, to use terrain for concealment, to listen to the prairie's warnings. Despite her exhaustion and lingering suspicion, Sarah found herself absorbing these lessons, admiring the skill with which he navigated the wilderness. When he suddenly raised his hand in a signal to stop, she froze instantly, her senses alert for danger. Two Hawks pointed to a nearby thicket where a young deer browsed, unaware of their presence. In a single, fluid motion, he knocked an arrow to his bow and drew it back. The arrow flew true, taking the deer through the heart. It collapsed without a sound, its death as efficient and merciful as possible. Food, Two Hawks stated, moving toward the fallen animal, and warmer clothing for you. He approached the deer with reverence, kneeling beside it to whisper words in his native tongue before beginning the butchering process. Sarah watched, transfixed by the ritual that transformed the act of killing from mere necessity into something approaching ceremony. What did you say to it? She asked. Thanked its spirit for giving life so we might live, he replied, his knife moving with practiced precision. Asked forgiveness for taking what was not freely offered. He glanced up at, your people do not thank the animals they kill. The question carried no judgment, merely curiosity. Yet Sarah felt a strange discomfort. My father always said a prayer before we ate, she offered, thanking God for providing. Two Hawks nodded. Different words, same meaning. He worked in silence for several minutes before adding, all people must eat. All people must kill to live. How we honor what dies for us shows what kind of people we are. The simple philosophy resonated with Sarah in ways she hadn't expected. For months she had killed rabbits and squirrels to survive, feeling nothing beyond grim necessity. The idea that those deaths deserved acknowledgement, even reverence, offered a strange comfort. By the time Two Hawks had dressed the deer, salvaging every usable part, the afternoon light had begun to fade. He packed the meat efficiently, then gestured for Sarah to continue following. Camp close now, he assured her. Before dark, their destination proved to be a natural hollow in the riverbank, invisible until they were almost upon it. A narrow opening between cottonwood roots led to a sheltered basin, barely 20 feet across. A small lean-to of branches and hides stood against the far wall, with a fire pit positioned where smoke would disperse through a natural chimney in the earthen ceiling. Winter camp, Two Hawks explained, hidden from unfriendly eyes. The hollow offered perfect concealment, while providing protection from the elements, similar to Sarah's cave, but clearly chosen with a warrior's eye for defensibility. A single sentry positioned at the narrow entrance could guard against any approach. Two Hawks busied himself preparing a fire, while Sarah took stock of her surroundings. The camp showed signs of extended habitation, a stack of dried firewood, a crude drying rack for meat, even animal hides stretched for tanning. Yet it held no personal items, no decorative touches that might reveal something of its occupants. Character. "You live alone?" she asked as he coaxed flames from tinder. "For now," he replied. "My Lakota mother's people camp 2 days' journey north, will return when justice is found." He glanced at her. "Or when snow melts from high plains, whichever comes first." As the fire grew stronger, spreading welcome warmth throughout the hollow, 2 hawks skewered strips of venison on green sticks and positioned them over the flames. The rich aroma of cooking meat filled the air, causing Sarah's stomach to clench, painfully. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten anything so substantial. They ate in silence, Sarah forcing herself to take small, measured bites despite her hunger. 2 hawks watched her with quiet approval, recognizing the discipline of someone who had learned to ration scarce resources. When they had finished eating, he produced a water skin and a handful of dried chokecherries, a simple dessert that tasted like extravagance to Sarah's deprived palate. Only then, with hunger satisfied and the fire casting dancing shadows against the earthen walls, did 2 hawks finally ask the question she had been dreading. "Now, young one," he said, his deep voice gentle but firm, "tell me what you saw when bad men came." The request broke something inside her. For months, Sarah had carried the memory of the massacre locked away, unspoken, a weight she bore alone in the silence of her cave. Now, faced with a direct invitation to release that burden, words poured from her in a torrent of grief and horror. She described everything: the early morning attack, the methodical slaughter, her concealment in the tall grass, the clear view she had of the attackers removing native disguises afterward. She remembered specific phrases they had used, including names: Jackson, Miller, and their leader, a man called Porter with a distinctive scar bisecting his left eyebrow. 2 hawks listened without interruption, his face revealing little beyond intense concentration. When Sarah finally fell silent, emotionally drained by the recounting, he nodded once. "Same men," he confirmed grimly. "Same methods, same leader." He rose and moved to a small pack secured beneath a rock overhang. From it, he withdrew a folded piece of paper, a wanted poster weathered and creased from repeated handling. He passed it to Sarah. "Marcus Porter," 2 hawks said as she examined the crude illustration that did indeed show a man with a scarred eyebrow. "Former cavalry scout, now leads men who attack both white settlements and Indian hunting parties. Takes gold, horses, supplies, leaves bodies and blame." The poster offered a substantial reward for Porter's capture, dead or alive, but had been issued nearly 2 years earlier. The territorial authorities clearly hadn't succeeded in apprehending him. "He killed your family?" Sarah asked. 2 hawks' expression darkened. "My white father's trading post 4 winters ago. Men dressed as Lakota warriors attacked when father went to get supplies. Killed my mother, my sister." His hands tightened into fists. "Found my father last. Still alive. Told me the truth before joining my ancestors. Said attackers spoke to each other as white men do, not as Lakota. One called another by name. Porter." Sarah absorbed this information, connecting it with her own experience. "They want whites and Indians to blame each other," she said slowly, voicing the realization while they profit from both. "Smart girl," 2 hawks acknowledged. "Easier to steal, to kill when people look in wrong direction." He stared into the fire, his voice dropping lower. "Territorial officials send soldiers to punish Lakota for attacks we did not make. White settlers fear and hate us for violence done by men like Porter wearing false feathers." The political implications were beyond Sarah's full comprehension, but she understood enough. The murders she had witnessed were part of something larger, a deliberate strategy to incite conflict between settlers and native tribes. "Will anyone believe us?" she asked quietly. "A half Lakota outlaw and a child?" Two Hawks' gaze returned. To her, assessing. "Truth has power," he said simply, "but needs evidence. Needs witness who can speak to both worlds." He studied her with new intensity. "You walk between worlds now, Sarah Whitfield, not fully of white settlements anymore, not of Lakota people, something new." The use of her full name startled her. She hadn't introduced herself. Reading her surprise, Two Hawks explained, "Found small Bible in Wagon wreckage, had names written inside, Jacob, Mary, Thomas, and Sarah Whitfield." His expression softened slightly. "Kept book safe, will return to you when time is right." The knowledge that her family Bible, with all their births carefully inscribed in her father's neat handwriting, had been preserved sent unexpected warmth through Sarah's chest. Something tangible remained of her former life, even as that life receded further into memory with each passing day. "Porter's men are still hunting," she said, returning to more immediate concerns. "They were getting closer to my cave." Two Hawks nodded. "They search methodically, ridge by ridge, valley by valley." He added more wood to the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Storm will slow them for 2 days, maybe 3. After that, must be ready." "Ready for what?" "To hunt the hunters," he said simply, "to gather evidence that cannot be denied, to find justice for both our families." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "I'm just a child. What can I do against armed men?" "Not. All strength is in the arm that holds the weapon," Two Hawks replied. "Sometimes the strongest power is in the eyes that saw, the memory that holds, the voice that speaks truth when others listen." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You survived alone in the bluffs for 4 moons, found food, shelter, warmth, when grown men would have died. Such strength is rare, even among my people." His assessment, delivered without flattery or condescension, penetrated the defensive walls Sarah had built around herself. For months, she had defined herself solely by what she had lost. Now this warrior from a people she had been taught to. Fear was defining her by what she had achieved, by the strength she had demonstrated, rather than the weakness she felt. "I'm afraid," she admitted, the confession barely audible above the crackling fire. "Good," Two Hawks replied, surprising her. "Fear keeps warriors alive when courage alone would lead to death." He removed a small leather pouch from around his neck and held it out to her. "My father gave this to me when I first rode to war, said it would protect me if my heart remained true." The pouch was simple, crafted of soft buckskin, with beadwork patterns that Sarah couldn't decipher, yet the offering clearly carried profound significance. "I can't take this," she protested. "Not giving," Two Hawks clarified. "Lending, until our hunt is done." He placed the cord around her neck, the pouch settling against her chest with surprising warmth. "Medicine bag holds the power of protection, keeps evil spirits away, shows the path of truth when many trails cross." Sarah touched the pouch hesitantly, uncertain whether to believe in such things, yet unwilling to dismiss the sincerity behind the gesture. "Thank you," she said simply. Two Hawks nodded once, satisfied, then rose to check the security of their shelter before settling back beside the fire. "Sleep now," he instructed. "Tomorrow begin teaching you Lakota ways of moving, of seeing, of hunting, not to make you Lakota. Too late for that." A glimmer of amusement touched his eyes. "But to help you survive what comes." As Sarah curled beside the fire, wrapped in a buffalo robe Two Hawks had provided, she realized something had shifted during their conversation. The man she had feared just hours earlier had become, if not yet a friend, then at least an ally with whom she shared a common purpose. The isolation that had defined her existence for months had been broken, replaced by a tentative partnership, born of shared loss and mutual need. She fingered the medicine pouch as sleep approached, wondering what her father would think of her unlikely alliance with a half-Lakota outlaw. Thomas Whitfield had always been more open-minded than most settlers, cautioning his children against believing every frontier tale about savage Indians. He had taught them to judge individuals by their actions, not by the fears and prejudices of others. By that measure, Two Hawks had proven himself worthy of at least provisional trust. Whether that trust would be enough to sustain them through the dangerous days ahead remained to be seen. As consciousness faded, Sarah's last thought was a startling realization. For the first time since the massacre, she had spent hours without constantly looking over her shoulder, without jumping at every sound. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of the fragile alliance forming between them. But tonight, in the shelter of Two Hawks' hidden camp, Sarah Whitfield slept more soundly than she had in months, the medicine pouch warm against her skin like a promise of protection in a world that had offered precious little of it. Dawn arrived, with the promised storm, transforming the prairie landscape into a blinding chaos of wind-driven snow. Sarah woke to find Two Hawks already active, melting snow for drinking water and preparing a breakfast of venison strips and a dark-colored tea made from prairie roots. The hollow's natural configuration sheltered them from the worst of the blizzard, allowing a small fire that would have been impossible in more exposed terrain. "Storm good for us, bad for them," Two Hawks observed, handing Sarah a wooden cup of steaming tea. "Gives time to prepare." The preparation began immediately after their sparse meal. Despite the weather, Two Hawks insisted they use the enforced confinement for what he called teaching the eyes to see and the hands to speak. The first lesson involved moving silently across the hollow without disturbing a series of small pebbles he had arranged on the ground, an exercise in stealth that proved far more difficult than Sarah had anticipated. "Step like fox," Two Hawks instructed, demonstrating the careful foot placement that distributed weight gradually rather than all at once. "See with your whole body, not just your eyes." For hours they practiced this fundamental skill, with Two Hawks correcting Sarah's technique with patient persistence. When she finally crossed the hollow without disturbing a single pebble, his approval came as a simple nod that somehow carried more significance than effusive praise might have. The lessons continued throughout the day. How to move with the terrain rather than against it. How to use natural features for concealment, how to recognize the subtle signs that indicated recent human passage. By evening, Sarah's muscles ached from the unaccustomed movements, but her mind felt sharper, more attuned to details she would previously have overlooked. As they shared another meal of venison and foraged plants, Two Hawks assessed her progress with characteristic directness. "You learn quickly," he acknowledged. "Good eyes, good hands, but still move like white person. Too much hurry, too little patience." Sarah accepted the criticism without defensiveness. 4 months alone in the wilderness had stripped away many civilized pretenses, including false pride. "How long did it take you to learn these skills?" she asked. A rare smile touched Two Hawks' lips. "Still learning," he admitted. "Every day the land teaches those willing to listen." He added more wood to their fire. "Lakota children begin learning prairie ways when they first walk. By your age, already skilled hunters and trackers." The revelation surprised Sarah. Among, say, white settlers, children her age were considered too young for serious responsibilities beyond basic chores. Yet Two Hawks spoke of children her age as capable contributors to their community's survival. "I want to know more about your people," she requested, genuinely curious. "Not what white people say about them, but what you would want me to know." Two Hawks studied her thoughtfully, as if weighing how much to share. "Lakota are many bands, many families," he began slowly. once lived far east near Great Lakes, pushed west by other tribes, then by white settlement, now live on plains, follow buffalo herds, hunt deer and elk when buffalo are scarce. His voice carried a subtle pride as he continued, known as strong warriors, but also as people who value honor, truth-speaking, generosity to those in need. He described a complex society with elaborate social structures, warrior societies that maintained order, spiritual leaders who preserved sacred traditions, councils of elders who made decisions affecting the entire tribe. Far from the primitive, savages portrayed in penny dreadfuls and sensationalist newspapers, the Lakota emerged in his account as sophisticated people adapting to rapidly changing circumstances while striving to maintain their core values. Most important teaching. 2. Hawks emphasized is that all life is connected. Earth, sky, animals, people, all one circle. What harms one part harms all. The conversation gradually shifted from cultural exchange to practical planning. Using a stick to draw in the dirt floor, two hawks mapped the surrounding territory, indicating likely routes Porter's men would use once the storm passed. 3 main trails cross these plains, he explained, marking each on his crude map. Raiders must use one to reach eastern settlements before spring brings soldiers back to territory. How many men do they have? Sarah asked, studying the map. 8, maybe 10, two hawks estimated. Lost some in attacks on settlements, gained others who prefer stealing to working. He pointed to a narrow pass between 2 ridges. Here is where they must cross. No other path for horses when snow deep. So we wait for them there? Two hawks shook his head. Too dangerous. Need a plan that does not put you in their path. He considered for a moment. Need evidence first. Proof that links Porter to both attacks on your wagon train and on Lakota camps. What kind of proof would be enough? Sarah wondered, unsure what could possibly connect the 2 separate massacres. Something only raiders would have, two hawks replied. Something from both attacks that shows the same men responsible. He tapped the map thoughtfully. Porter keeps camp in old trading post 2 valleys south. Raiders gather there between attacks to divide spoils. Sarah's eyes widened. You know where they're based? Why haven't you attacked them there? 1 warrior against many guns. 2 hawks raised an eyebrow. Not brave, foolish. Have watched the place from a distance. Raiders keep guard day and night. Too many for one man to fight alone. The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear. 2 hawks had been waiting for an opportunity, and Sarah's testimony might provide it. Yet sending a child anywhere near Porter's stronghold seemed unconscionable. I want to help, Sarah said firmly, sensing his hesitation. They killed my family. I have a right to be part of bringing them to justice. 2 hawks studied her with newfound respect. Brave words, he acknowledged, but brave words alone do not defeat rifles. He added another mark to his map. Need help from those with authority, those who can arrest, who can testify in white men's courts. The army? Sarah suggested. Fort Robinson, 2 hawks confirmed. 3 days' journey in good weather, longer in snow. His expression revealed deep skepticism. Army rarely believes the words of Indians, may think you are bewitched by a savage kidnapper. The assessment was harsh but realistic. Relations between native tribes and military authorities remained, fraught with misunderstanding and prejudice. Even with Sarah's testimony, convincing the army to act against white men based on a half-Lakota outlaw's accusations would be difficult at best. What about the territorial marshal? Sarah suggested. My father said marshals answer to federal judges, not local authorities. 2 hawks considered this alternative. Marshal Reynolds rides a circuit through frontier towns, he said slowly. Fair man, from what I hear. Arrested white men for crimes against Indians before. He nodded, decision made. After the storm passes, we find a way to reach Reynolds before he leaves territory. The plan took shape gradually over the next 2. days as the blizzard continued its assault on the plains. Between training sessions that grew increasingly demanding, they developed a strategy that balanced safety with their need for justice. Rather than confronting Porter's men directly, they would gather evidence of the raiders' crimes, then seek out Marshal Reynolds, who was reportedly investigating a series of robberies in Deadwood. In the meantime, Two Hawks would continue training Sarah in wilderness skills that might prove crucial to their survival. On the third day, the storm finally abated, leaving the landscape transformed under several feet of fresh snow. Two Hawks emerged from their shelter shortly after dawn, surveying the pristine white expanse with a tracker's eye. "No movement yet," he reported upon returning. "Snow is too deep for horses. Raiders will wait at least one day for paths to clear enough." To travel, he began gathering supplies into a pack. Good time to move toward the trading post, watch from a distance. Sarah had been dreading this moment, the transition from relative safety to deliberate proximity to danger, yet the alternative remaining. Hidden while Porter's men continued their campaign of violence was unacceptable. She had not survived the massacre and months of solitary struggle merely to hide while others determined her fate. "I'm ready," she said with more confidence than she felt, gathering the few possessions she had accumulated during her stay with Two Hawks, a small hunting knife he had given her, a pair of properly made moccasins that replaced her improvised footwear, and a rabbit fur-lined jacket that offered significantly more protection than her tattered dress. Two Hawks assessed her critically, then reached into his pack and withdrew a small leather pouch. From it, he produced dark ochre, charcoal, and bear grease. With practiced hands, he began applying these to Sarah's face in patterns that disrupted her naturally pale complexion. "War paint?" she asked hesitantly. "Not war paint," he corrected. "Hiding paint. Helps eyes not see what is there." He worked methodically, transforming her appearance with strategic applications of the natural pigments. "White skin catches eye in the prairie. This makes you part of the shadows." When he finished, he held up a polished piece of metal that served as a crude mirror. Sarah barely recognized herself. The face that looked back at her was neither white nor native, but something else entirely, a creature of the wilderness, eyes intense beneath darkened brows, cheekbones accentuated by strategic shadows. "Remember," Two Hawks instructed as they prepared to depart, "we watch only. No confrontation. Evidence, then find Reynolds." They traveled south, moving with the careful deliberation Two Hawks had drilled into Sarah during their days of training. The fresh snow made progress difficult, but offered the advantage of clearly revealing any other traveler's passage. By midday, they had covered perhaps 4 miles, working their way gradually toward a ridge that overlooked the valley where Porter reportedly maintained his base. As they paused to rest in a sheltered grove of cottonwoods, a distant sound reached, and them, the distinctive crack of an axe against wood echoing across the valley. "Raiders clearing fallen trees from trail," Two Hawks surmised, his expression sharpening. "Preparing to move soon." They altered their course slightly, approaching the sound with extreme caution. 2 hours of careful stalking brought them to a vantage point above a narrow trail where 2 men worked to clear a massive cottonwood that had fallen across the path. From their elevated position, partially concealed behind a rock outcropping, Sarah and Two Hawks observed the activity below. "Porter's men," Two Hawks whispered, his voice tight with controlled anger. Sarah studied the men intently. "The one with the red beard, he was on our wagon train. I remember him laughing when they shot the Wilson boys." Two Hawks nodded grimly. "Man called Miller, also at the trading post when my family died." They watched as the men continued their labor, their conversation occasionally carrying up to the hidden observers. Much of it was mundane complaints about the weather and the work, but one exchange captured their attention completely. Porter wants us ready to move by tomorrow, the red-bearded man announced. Says the army's pulling most troops from Fort Robinson for the season. Once they're gone, we'll hit the Miller homestead east of Chadron. Another Indian attack, one of the other men asked with a coarse laugh. Miller spat into the snow. Nah, this one's different. Porter's got a deal with some territorial officials. We make it look like angry settlers retaliating for the Wagon train massacre. Officials get what they want. More reason to push the Lakota onto reservations. We get what we want, nobody looking too hard at who's really behind it. The casual confirmation of their suspicions sent a chill through Sarah that had nothing to do with the winter air. This wasn't merely opportunistic banditry, but a coordinated strategy involving corrupt officials. The implications stretched far, beyond the immediate threat to either settlers or Lakota. Two Hawks' expression had hardened into a mask of controlled fury. His hand tightened on his knife, and for a moment, Sarah feared he might abandon their plan of observation for immediate vengeance. She touched his arm gently, reminding him of their larger purpose. After a tense moment, he nodded, acknowledging the wisdom of restraint. They remained in their hidden position until the men finished clearing the path and departed toward what must be their main camp. Only then did Two Hawks and Sarah retreat to a more secure location to discuss what they had learned. Bigger than we thought, Two Hawks said grimly, as they settled in a sheltered hollow nearly a mile from the trail. Not just raiders, government men are involved too. Sarah struggled to process the implications. Why would territorial officials work with men like Porter? Land, Two Hawks replied simply. Always about land. Lakota hunting grounds are good, for cattle, maybe gold. Treaties protect some areas, but if Lakota are blamed for attacks on settlers, the army would force them onto reservations, Sarah finished, understanding dawning. And the land would be open for ranching and mining. Two Hawks nodded. Simple plan. Porter attacks settlers, blames Lakota. Attacks Lakota, blames settlers. Officials claim need for protection on both sides. Everyone moves to where the government wants them. Everyone, except the people who died, Sarah added bitterly. Need more than what we heard, Two Hawks decided after a moment of thought. Words alone not enough. Need something that connects Porter to both massacres. He studied the terrain thoughtfully. Their main camp close now, maybe 1 mile south in Old Trading Post. Sarah felt a flicker of apprehension. You're thinking of going into their camp? Not I, Two Hawks corrected. We, but not the center of camp. Edge only, where they keep horses and supplies. He outlined a daring but potentially feasible plan. Using the cover of darkness, they would approach Porter's headquarters and search the outbuildings for anything that might serve as concrete evidence of the raiders' dual identity. The risk was substantial, but so was the potential reward. If they could obtain proof linking Porter to both massacres, perhaps distinctive items stolen from both the wagon train and the Lakota camps, they would have something tangible to present. To Marshal Reynolds. As dusk approached, they moved closer to the abandoned trading post, circling to approach from the west, where the terrain offered better concealment. From a ridgeline overlooking the small collection of weathered buildings, they observed the camp's layout, noting guard positions and patterns of movement. 5 buildings, Two Hawks whispered, pointing to each in turn. Main house where Porter. Stays, bunkhouse for men, stable for horses, 2 storage sheds, small cabin for guard. Activity in the camp suggested at least 8 men present, with 2 visible on guard duty, 1 near the main house and another patrolling between buildings. The rest appeared to be gathered in the bunkhouse, where light and occasional laughter spilled from crude windows. Wait for deeper darkness, Two Hawks advised. Men drink after day's work. Guards grow less careful as night passes. As they settled in to wait, Sarah felt a strange calm replace her earlier apprehension. The months of solitary survival followed. By Two Hawks' intensive training had transformed her from a frightened child into something else. Not quite a warrior, but no longer merely a victim. Whatever happened in the coming hours, she would face it not with paralyzing fear, but with the focused awareness Two Hawks had cultivated in her. The medicine pouch hung warm against her skin beneath her jacket, a tangible reminder of the unlikely alliance that had brought her to this moment. From the hidden cave, where she had spent months in isolating fear, to the precipice of direct action against those who had destroyed her family, the journey seemed both impossible and inevitable. As full darkness settled over the plains and the sounds from the bunkhouse grew more boisterous, Two Hawks touched her shoulder lightly. "Time," he said simply. Together they began their careful descent toward the raiders' camp, moving like shadows through the moonlit snow. The mission before them carried enormous risk, but also the first real possibility of justice, not just for themselves, but for all those who had fallen victim to Porter's calculated violence. What neither could anticipate was how their careful plan would collide with unexpected developments already in motion within the camp below. Developments that would transform their mission of evidence, gathering into something far more dangerous and consequential than either had imagined. As they neared the perimeter of the trading post, a flicker of movement from the stable caught Two Hawks' attention. He signaled for Sarah to freeze, both of them melting into the shadows of a snowdrift. A figure emerged from the stable doorway, moving with the furtive caution of someone attempting to avoid detection. The moonlight revealed a man dressed in the uniform of a U.S. Army lieutenant, his insignia visible even at this distance. He carried a leather satchel clutched tightly to his chest as he hurried toward the westernmost edge of the camp, directly toward where Sarah and Two Hawks lay, concealed. Two Hawks pulled Sarah deeper into the shadows, his body tensed for either flight or confrontation. The officer passed within 15 feet of their position, his features clearly visible in the moonlight. A young man, perhaps in his mid-20s, with an expression of grim determination that suggested he was engaged in something far removed from official army business. When the officer had moved a safe distance beyond them, Two Hawks gestured for Sarah to follow as he tracked the man's progress. They maintained a careful distance, using the skills they had practiced over the past days to move silently through the snow-covered terrain. The officer continued for nearly half a mile before stopping in a small clearing. He glanced nervously over his shoulder, then opened the satchel and removed several documents, spreading them on a flat rock. Even from their concealed position, Sarah and Two Hawks could see that the papers appeared to be official military orders, and maps with territorial government seals visible on some pages. The sound of approaching hoofbeats caused the officer to hurriedly gather the documents. A lone rider appeared at the edge of the clearing, a civilian dressed in the practical attire of a frontier professional rather than the rough clothing of Porter's raiders. "You're late, Lieutenant Parker," the newcomer said, dismounting with fluid grace. "I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve." "This is the last time, Hammond," the officer replied, his voice tight with strain. "I've given you everything. You asked for patrol schedules, troop deployments, reservation boundaries. I want the letters back, all of them." The civilian, Hammond, laughed softly. "That's not how this works, Lieutenant. Those letters detailing your gambling debts and embezzlement from the fort's treasury remain my insurance of your continued cooperation." "You don't understand," Parker hissed. "The commanding officer is getting suspicious. There will be an audit when the Inspector General visits next month, when they discover the missing funds." "That sounds like a problem for you to solve," Hammond interrupted smoothly. "Perhaps another raid on a settlement? The chaos might provide cover for a tragic fire in the fort's administrative building." Sarah felt Two Hawks tense beside her, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. She placed a restraining hand on his arm, silently urging caution. The conversation unfolding before them represented intelligence far more valuable than anything they might have found in the raiders' camp. "More deaths?" Parker's voice cracked. "We agreed the last raid would be the final one. You said the territorial governor had what he needed to force the reservation boundaries to be redrawn." Hammond shrugged. "Plans change. The Eastern newspapers have taken an unfortunate interest in our Indian troubles. Some influential senators are asking questions. We need a more dramatic incident to justify a significant military response." "I won't be part of another massacre," Parker declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "Then you'll hang for theft and treason," Hammond said coldly. "Make your choice, Lieutenant. Your career and life, or a few more dead settlers and savages." The lieutenant's shoulders slumped in defeat. "What do you need me to do? Ensure that Captain Wilson takes the main force southeast on Thursday, as far from the Miller homestead as possible. Leave no more than 5 men at the fort." Hammond took the satchel from Parker's unresisting hands. "The territorial government will reward your cooperation when this is over. Perhaps a position as an Indian agent. I hear they live quite comfortably." As the men concluded their business, 2 hawks signaled for Sarah to begin a careful retreat. They had heard enough, more than enough. The conspiracy stretched higher than either had imagined, implicating not just territorial officials, but army officers as well. Only when they had put considerable distance between themselves and the meeting, did 2 hawks finally speak, his voice tight with controlled rage and urgency. "Must reach Marshal Reynolds immediately," he said. "Evidence bigger than we hoped. Names, places, plans for new attack." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. "They said Thursday. That's just 3 days from now." 2 Hawk's expression was grim but determined. "Then we ride tonight. No time for hiding trails." The fragile plan they had developed over cautious days had just been rendered obsolete by the urgency of what they had witnessed. Now they faced a desperate race against time, to find a federal marshal willing to believe their story, to convince him to act against powerful territorial interests, and to prevent another massacre that would push the frontier closer to all-out war. As they hurried back toward 2 Hawks' camp to prepare for their journey, Sarah realized that their unlikely partnership had just been transformed into something far more consequential than either had anticipated. No longer were they merely seeking justice for past wrongs. They were now all that stood between innocent families and imminent slaughter, the only ones who could expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of territorial power. The burden seemed impossible for a half-Lakota outlaw and an 8-year-old orphan. Yet as Sarah felt the weight of the medicine pouch against her chest, she found herself embracing 2 Hawks' earlier words. Not all strength is in the arm that holds the weapon. Sometimes the strongest power is in the eyes that saw, the memory that holds, the voice that speaks truth when others listen. Moonlight transformed the snow-covered prairie into a terrain of silver and shadow as Sarah and 2 Hawks made their desperate journey toward Deadwood. They traveled through the night, pushing themselves to the limits of endurance. 2 Hawks had managed to acquire a single horse from his hidden cache, not by choice, but necessity. Under normal circumstances, he would never have risked the visibility of mounted travel, but the urgency of their mission overrode all caution. Sarah rode in front, her small frame nestled against 2 Hawks as he guided the horse through the treacherous winter landscape. The temperature had plummeted after sunset, their breath crystallizing in the frigid air. Despite the layers of fur and hide that protected them, the cold seeped inexorably into flesh and bone. "How much farther?" Sarah asked, through chattering, her teeth as they paused briefly to rest the horse. "Deadwood still 2 days' hard ride," 2 Hawks replied, his voice tight with concern as he noted her condition. "Need shelter soon. You grow too cold." Against his instincts for speed, 2 Hawks diverted their course toward a stand of cottonwoods that lined a frozen creek bed. There, they found enough shelter to build a small fire, its heat offering temporary relief from the bone-deep chill that had settled into their bodies. As Sarah huddled near the flames, two hawks studied their crude map by firelight, calculating distances and routes with the precision of someone whose life had depended on such skills. "Marshal Reynolds rides circuit," he muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. "If not in Deadwood, must be in Custer City or Hot Springs." "What if we can't find him in time?" Sarah asked, voicing the fear that had grown with each passing mile. Hawk's expression remained stoic, but his eyes betrayed the weight of responsibility he carried. "Then we find Army Commander at Fort Robinson, or newspaper man in Deadwood, someone who listens." He didn't add the obvious, that their story, without the marshal's credibility behind it, might be dismissed as the ravings of a half-breed outlaw and a traumatized child. The conspiracy they had uncovered reached into the highest levels of territorial government. Those with the power to stop it might well be complicit in its design. They resumed their journey before dawn, pushing the horse as hard as they dared through the snow-choked landscape. By mid-morning, they encountered their first sign of civilization, a crude road where the passage of supply wagons had packed the snow into a more navigable path. "From here, follow the road," Two Hawks decided after careful consideration. "Faster, though more dangerous." The danger manifested sooner than either had anticipated. They had traveled perhaps 5 miles along the road when the sound of approaching riders caused Two Hawks to veer sharply into the cover of a nearby pine grove. 3 men appeared around a bend, their horses moving at a purposeful trot rather than the casual pace of ordinary travelers. Two Hawks' hand tightened on Sarah's shoulder as they crouched behind a fallen log. "Porter's men," he whispered, recognition and alarm evident in his voice. Sarah peered cautiously over the log. The lead rider was unmistakably Miller, the red-bearded man they had observed clearing the trail. The other 2 were unfamiliar to her, but their rough appearance and well-armed posture marked them as members of Porter's gang. "They have left camp already," Two Hawks observed grimly, "moving earlier than expected." The raiders passed without, noticing the tracks where Two Hawks had guided their horse off the road, too intent on their own mission to pay close attention to the snow-covered terrain. Only when the sounds of their passage had faded completely did Two Hawks and Sarah emerge from hiding. "They ride toward Deadwood also," Two Hawks stated, his expression darkening with new concern, "perhaps to meet Hammond or contact in town." "Or they're looking for Marshal Reynolds too," Sarah suggested, understanding dawning. "To stop him from interfering with their plans." The possibility added new urgency to their already desperate journey. If Porter's men reached the marshal first, they might eliminate the very man whose authority Sarah and Two Hawks needed to expose the conspiracy and prevent the coming attack. They pushed onward with renewed determination, Two Hawks now scanning the terrain with heightened vigilance. The landscape gradually changed as they moved further west, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills studded with pine and spruce. By nightfall, the distant glow of Deadwood was visible on the horizon, a smudge of yellow light against the darkening sky. Two Hawks halted their approach while still a mile from the outskirts of the mining town. "Too dangerous to enter together," he explained, helping Sarah dismount from their exhausted horse. "White child with an Indian man raises questions we cannot answer quickly." Despite the progress in her training, Sarah felt a flutter of fear at the implication. "You want me to go into town alone?" Two Hawks nodded. "You find Marshal Reynolds. Tell him what we heard. I watch from ridge above town. Keep eye on Porter's men if they arrive." He reached into his pack and removed Sarah's family Bible, which he had kept safe since finding it in the massacre's aftermath. From between its pages, he extracted a folded document, a letter of introduction that had once belonged to her father. "Show this to the marshal," Two Hawks instructed. Proves you are Thomas Whitfield's daughter, gives your words weight. The plan was risky but sound. A white child would attract attention in Deadwood, but not the same kind of dangerous scrutiny that would follow a half-Lakota outlaw. Sarah would be viewed as an object of curiosity and concern, perhaps even sympathy. Two Hawks would be seen as a threat, possibly arrested before he could deliver their warning. "What if I can't find him?" Sarah asked, clutching the Bible and letter with cold-numbed fingers. "Marshal's office on Main Street," Two Hawks replied. "If not there, try largest saloon, Brown's Hotel. Many officials conduct business there." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "You are strong, Sarah Whitfield. Stronger than most warriors I have known. You will find him." Under the cover of darkness, they approached the town as closely as they dared. Two Hawks used the last of their ochre, paint to remove the wilderness camouflage from Sarah's face, then helped her arrange her clothing to appear as presentable as possible, given their rough journey. With a final reminder of their plan and a promise to watch over her from the ridge, he sent her toward the scattered buildings that marked Deadwood's eastern edge. Sarah walked with deliberate purpose, fighting the urge to run or hide. The first. Few structures were simple miners' cabins, their windows glowing with lamplight. No one challenged her progress. As she moved deeper into town, the buildings grew more substantial. A livery stable, a blacksmith shop, a general store shuttered for the night. The main street loomed ahead, its boardwalks crowded with miners, gamblers, and the various entrepreneurs who catered to their needs. The noise and activity overwhelmed Sarah after months of wilderness silence. Raucous laughter spilled from saloon, doorways. A piano played somewhere, its cheerful melody incongruous with her mission's gravity. Men shouted to one another across the rutted, snow-covered street. The smells of wood smoke, whiskey, and unwashed humanity assaulted her senses. Sarah forced herself to move forward, scanning buildings for any sign of the marshal's office. She located it halfway down the main street, a narrow structure wedged between a gunsmith's shop and a photography studio. A painted wooden sign proclaimed U.S. Marshal above the door, but the windows were dark, the office clearly closed for the night. Following Two Hawks' contingency plan, Sarah turned her attention to Brown's Hotel, the largest building in town. Light blazed from every window, and the sounds of gambling, drinking, and conversation suggested it remained the center of Deadwood's nighttime activities. Gathering her courage, she approached the main entrance. A burly man stationed at the door blocked her path with a massive arm. "No place for a kid," he growled, though his expression showed more curiosity than hostility. "Where's your folks?" Sarah looked up at him, summoning the story Two Hawks had helped her prepare. "Please, sir, I need to find Marshal Reynolds. It's urgent. My family's in danger." The doorman's weathered face registered surprise, then concern. "Reynolds ain't here, girl. Rode out yesterday for Custer City. Ain't due back till end of week." The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. Without the marshal, their carefully constructed plan collapsed. The Miller homestead would be attacked in just 2 days, and they had no authority figure to intervene. "When exactly will he return?" she pressed, desperation edging into her voice. The doorman shrugged. "Hard to say. Weather's been bad. Roads are worse." He studied her more carefully, noting her exhausted appearance and unusual clothing. "You in some kind of trouble, girl? Town sheriff might help if it can't wait for Reynolds." Sarah hesitated. Two Hawks had been explicit about seeking the federal marshal, whose jurisdiction transcended local politics and potential corruption. A town sheriff might well be part of the very conspiracy they sought to expose. Before she could decide how to respond, a commotion further down the street captured the doorman's attention. 3 riders had arrived, dismounting in front of the darkened marshal's office. Even at this distance, Sarah recognized Miller's imposing frame and red beard. "Get inside," the doorman ordered, misinterpreting her sudden tension. "I'll fetch Sheriff Collins. He'll sort whatever trouble you're in." Sarah slipped past him into the crowded saloon, her mind racing. Porter's men had reached Deadwood ahead of schedule, presumably looking for Marshal Reynolds. When they discovered he was away, what would they do? Return to their camp? Wait for his arrival? Or seek another way to ensure their plans proceeded unhindered? The interior of Brown's hotel assaulted her senses. Bright gaslights, the clatter of poker chips, shouts. From the faro tables, women in colorful dresses moving among the predominantly male clientele. Sarah pressed herself against a wall, trying to become invisible while considering her limited options. A voice nearby caught her attention, refined, educated, distinctly out of place among the frontier rough and tumble. Told the governor explicitly that these incidents must cease if we're to attract Eastern investment to the territory. Sarah turned slowly, locating the speaker at a corner table partially screened by a beaded curtain. A well-dressed man of perhaps 50 years sat with his back to the wall, addressing two companions whose faces she couldn't see from her position. "The territorial legislature meets next month," the man continued, sipping from a crystal glass that contained amber liquid. "If these Indian troubles persist, the development funds we've requested will be denied yet again." Something in his voice, the precise diction, the authoritative tone, triggered Sarah's memory. She had heard this man before, or one very like him during the clandestine meeting Two Hawks and she had witnessed. Could this be Hammond, the government agent who had blackmailed Lieutenant Parker? Sarah edged closer to the beaded curtain, straining to hear more of the conversation without being noticed. "The Miller situation will be resolved before week's end," one of the other men replied, his voice deliberately lowered. "Porter assures me the evidence will clearly implicate Spotted Elk's band. With Reynolds away, Sheriff Collins will handle the initial investigation exactly as we've arranged." "And the army?" The well-dressed man, Hammond, Sarah was now certain, inquired. "Lieutenant Parker has ensured that most troops will be occupied with a wild goose chase to the southeast. Captain Wilson remains ignorant of our arrangement." The confirmation that she had stumbled upon the very conspirators they sought sent a chill through Sarah's body. Here were the architects of the plot that had claimed her family, planning yet another massacre, with the casual detachment of men discussing a business transaction. She needed to get this information to Two Hawks immediately. Together, they might still find a way to warn the Miller family, even without the marshal's assistance. Sarah began to back away from the curtained alcove, planning her escape from the crowded saloon. Her retreat was halted by a collision with a solid object. Turning, she found herself face to face with Miller, the red-bearded raider who had helped slaughter her family. His small eyes narrowed with confusion, then widened with shock as recognition dawned. "You!" he exclaimed, his hand moving toward the pistol at his belt. "The Whitfield girl!" Sarah reacted with the instinctive speed Two Hawks had drilled into her. She ducked under Miller's grasping arm and bolted toward the saloon's main entrance, weaving between tables and startled patrons. Behind her, she heard Miller's shout, "Stop that girl! $5 to the man who catches her!" The promise of reward galvanized several nearby miners who moved to block her path. Sarah changed direction, spotting a side door partially hidden behind the long bar. She slid beneath the outstretched arm of a bearded prospector, rolled under a card table, sending chips flying, and sprinted for the exit. The barkeeper made a grab for her as she passed, his fingers catching the edge of her jacket. Sarah slipped free, bursting through the side door into a narrow alley between buildings. The frigid night air hit her like a slap after the saloon's humid warmth. She ran blindly, hearing pursuit behind her, searching desperately for a path. Toward the eastern ridge, where two hawks waited, a hand clamped onto her shoulder, spinning her around. Miller loomed over her, his face contorted with rage and triumph. "Thought you were dead with the others," he snarled, maintaining his grip despite her struggles. "Porter will want to know how you survived, and what you've told." His words cut off abruptly as an arrow sprouted from his shoulder. Miller released Sarah with a howl of pain, staggering backward. From the shadows at the alley's end, two hawks emerged, another arrow already nocked to his bow. "Run, Sarah!" he commanded, loosing the second arrow that caught Miller in the thigh, driving him to his knees. Sarah sprinted toward two hawks, but their escape route was suddenly blocked by the emergence of Porter's other men from the saloons. Main entrance, they spotted two hawks immediately, shouting warnings and drawing pistols. "This way!" Two hawks grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her down a cross alley toward the backside of the buildings. Gunshots cracked behind them, bullets splintering wood as they ducked around a corner. They ran in desperate silence, two hawks leading them through. A maze of stables, storage sheds and trash heaps that formed Deadwood's less presentable backside. "The horse?" Sarah gasped as they paused momentarily behind a water trough. "Too far," two hawks replied grimly. "Must find a different way out. Of town." He peered cautiously around the trough's edge. "Too many looking for us now." The sound of approaching searchers forced them into motion again. They darted between buildings, keeping to shadows, avoiding the lantern-lit main street where their pursuers concentrated their efforts. At the town's northern edge, they encountered an unexpected obstacle. A large mining operation, its excavations forming a wide, impassable pit between them and the open country beyond. "Must go around," two hawks decided after a moment's assessment. "Follow creek bed west, then north." They descended into the shallow gully where Deadwood Creek flowed, its banks offering concealment from casual observation. The frigid water soaked through Sarah's moccasins as they splashed along the streambed, but the cold was preferable to capture. They had traveled perhaps half a mile when Two Hawks suddenly halted, his posture alert to a new threat. Sarah heard it moments later, the distinctive sound of horses moving through water, approaching from ahead. "Up!" Two Hawks ordered, helping Sarah scramble up the steep creek bank. They crouched in the underbrush, watching as 5 riders rounded a bend in the stream. The lead rider was unmistakable even in the moonlight, Marcus Porter himself, his scarred eyebrow visible beneath his hat brim. He rode with the confidence of a man accustomed to command, flanked by 4 hard-faced men whose ready rifles suggested they anticipated confrontation rather than pursuit. "Hammond said they were heading north," Porter called to his men. "Spread out along the creek bank. The half-breed will likely follow the water to mask their trail." The riders began to separate, 2 continuing along the creek, while the others moved to higher ground on either side. Two Hawks and Sarah remained motionless, in their inadequate hiding place, aware that discovery was now merely a matter of time. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the gurgling creek. Two Hawks' expression was resolute. "No escape for both," he said softly. "One must create diversion, so other can warn the Miller family." The implication was clear. One of them would need to sacrifice freedom, perhaps life, so the other could continue their mission. Before Sarah could protest this suicidal plan, Two Hawks pressed the family Bible into her hands. "You know what Porter plans," he said urgently. "Know where Miller Homestead is from the map. Must reach them before raiders do." "I can't leave you," Sarah protested, tears freezing on her cheeks in the bitter cold. "Not leaving," Two Hawks corrected. "Continuing mission. Most important thing now." He gripped her shoulders, his dark eyes intense in the moonlight. "This is why you survived the Wagon attack, why the Great Spirit brought us together, to save others from the same fate." Sarah recognized the truth in his words, though it tore at her heart. Their partnership had transcended its unlikely beginnings, becoming something neither had anticipated. a bond forged in shared purpose and mutual respect that defied the divisions of their time. "How will I find you again?" she asked, fighting back sobs that would betray their position. Two hawks removed the medicine pouch from around his neck and placed it over her head. "This will lead you," he said simply. "Now go. North Ridge has a trail that leads east toward Miller Homestead. Do not stop until you reach them." With a final squeeze of her shoulders, two hawks rose to a crouch. "When you hear an owl call, run north. Do not look back." Before Sarah could respond, he was gone, slipping away through the underbrush with the silent efficiency he had tried to teach her. For long moments, nothing happened. The search parties continued their methodical progression along the creek, moving inexorably closer to her hiding place. Then came the call. Not an owl's hoot as she had expected, but a wild, ululating Lakota, a cry that echoed through the night, followed by the distinctive twang of a bowstring and a man's pained shout. The searchers reacted immediately, abandoning their careful approach for a headlong rush toward the commotion. "It's the half-breed," Porter's voice carried clearly. "Get him alive if you can." Sarah seized the moment, scrambling up the north bank and sprinting toward the ridge two hawks had indicated. Behind her, more shouts erupted, followed by several gunshots in quick succession. She ran blindly, tears streaming down her face, the medicine pouch bouncing against her chest with each desperate stride. She did not look back, honoring Two Hawk's final instruction, though every instinct screamed for her to return, to help the man who had become more than her rescuer, her teacher, her ally, perhaps the closest thing to family she had left in the world. The ridge loomed before her, a dark mass against the star-strewn sky. As Sarah began the ascent, a final gunshot echoed across the valley, followed by a cheer from Porter's men that chilled her blood more thoroughly than any winter wind. She paused for just a moment, gasping for breath, her heart breaking with the knowledge of what that triumphant shout likely meant. Then, clutching the Bible and medicine pouch like talismans against despair, Sarah Whitfield turned her face eastward and continued her solitary journey toward the Miller homestead. Two Hawks had given her a mission, perhaps sacrificed his life for it. She would not fail him, would not allow more innocent families to suffer the fate that had claimed her own. The burden seemed impossible for an 8-year-old orphan. Yet as the medicine pouch warmed against her skin, Sarah found herself embracing the strength Two Hawks had recognized in her from the beginning, not the strength of arms or weapons, but the more enduring power of witnessed truth and unflinching courage in its telling. Dawn painted the eastern horizon in pale gold when Sarah first glimpsed the Miller homestead in the distance. She had traveled through the night without rest, pushing her small body well beyond exhaustion, guided only by the crude map she had memorized from Two Hawks' drawings and an iron determination that would not yield to cold, hunger, or despair. The farm appeared peaceful in the early morning light. A sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a large barn, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures where a few cattle huddled against the winter chill. Smoke rose from the chimney in a straight column, suggesting that the family was already awake and going about their morning routine, unaware of the fate Porter and his men had planned for them. Sarah paused at the edge of the property. Suddenly, uncertain how to proceed, she was filthy, exhausted, dressed in a bizarre combination of settler and native clothing. Her face, though cleaned of Two Hawks' protective pigments, bore the weathered look of someone who had lived wild for months. How could she convince the Millers that she wasn't deranged, that her warning was genuine? The medicine pouch seemed to grow warmer against her chest, as if lending her strength. Sarah squared her shoulders and continued forward, following the rutted drive that led to the cabin's front door. Before she had reached the midpoint, a tall man emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, clearly alerted by the approach of a stranger. "That's far enough," he called, raising the weapon to his shoulder. State your business." Sarah halted, raising her empty hands to show she carried no weapon. "Mr. Miller," she called back, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "My name is Sarah Whitfield. I've come to warn you. You and your family are in danger." The man advanced cautiously, rifle still trained in her direction. As he drew closer, Sarah could see he was younger than she had initially thought. Perhaps 30, with a weathered face that spoke of hard work rather than age. His eyes narrowed as he took in her appearance. "Whitfield?" he repeated, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "Any relation to Thomas Whitfield, from the Richardson wagon train?" Sarah's heart leaped. "He was my father," she confirmed. The rifle lowered slightly. "Word came that everyone in that train was killed by Indians last August. No survivors." "That's what they wanted people to believe," Sarah replied, her voice strengthening with urgency. "But it wasn't Indians who attacked us. It was white men disguised as Lakota. The same men who are planning to attack your farm tomorrow, making it look like settler retaliation." Complete disbelief replaced the wariness in Miller's expression. "That's quite a tale, young lady. Perhaps you'd better come inside and explain it to my wife and me." He gestured toward the cabin with his rifle barrel, not quite a welcome, but no longer an outright rejection. The cabin's interior was warm and well-ordered, smelling of wood smoke, baking bread, and coffee. A woman stood by the iron stove, her expression alarmed as her husband ushered in their unusual visitor. Two young children, a boy of perhaps 6 and a girl a few years younger, peered curiously from behind their mother's skirts. "Martha, this is Sarah Whitfield," Miller explained, setting his rifle in a rack by the door, but keeping a wary eye on Sarah. "Says she's Thomas Whitfield's daughter from the Richardson train. Claims to have a warning for us." Martha Miller's face softened with immediate concern. "The poor child looks half frozen and starved. Warnings can wait until she's had something hot to eat." She moved forward, maternal instinct overriding caution, and guided Sarah to a chair near the stove. "James, fetch a blanket," Sarah allowed, herself to be seated, though every moment of delay heightened her anxiety. As Martha placed a bowl of steaming porridge before her, Sarah reached into her jacket and withdrew her father's Bible and the letter of introduction. "Please," she said, pushing the items toward James Miller, "this will prove who I am, and we don't have much time." Miller examined the Bible's family registry page, where the Whitfield births were recorded, then opened the letter, his expression growing more troubled as he read. "This is genuine," he finally admitted, handing the documents to his wife. "Thomas Whitfield and I corresponded about joining forces when his family reached Dakota territory. We have land adjacent to what would have been his parcel." With her identity established, Sarah forced herself to eat a few bites of porridge, recognizing that her body needed fuel for what still lay ahead. Between careful spoonfuls, she related her story: the wagon train massacre, her months of solitary survival, 2 Hawks' intervention, and finally, the conspiracy they had uncovered. "The man leading them is called Marcus Porter," she explained, watching the Millers' reactions closely. "He works with corrupt territorial officials and even some army officers. They attack settlers disguised as Indians, then attack Indian camps disguised as settlers. They're trying to start a war to force the Lakota onto reservations so they can take their land." James Miller's initial skepticism had gradually transformed into grim consideration as Sarah's narrative unfolded. "I've heard of Porter," he acknowledged. "Notorious scout turned outlaw. There's been talk of strange patterns in the attacks. Settlements hit when they should have been protected. Indian camps raided when they were supposedly under army observation." "They're planning to attack your farm tomorrow," Sarah continued, urgently, making it look like Lakota retaliation for the wagon train massacre. "They have arrangements with someone in the territorial government named Hammond and an army lieutenant named Parker. The marshal is away, and most troops will be deliberately sent elsewhere. Martha Miller had gone pale, clutching her children closer. James, we should leave. Take the children to Chadron until this is sorted out. Miller shook his head slowly. Roads are barely passable after the last storm. With the wagon and children, we'd be easy targets if Porter's men are already watching. The property. He turned back to Sarah. How many men does Porter have? At least 8 that we saw, Sarah replied. Maybe more. Too many to fight, Miller concluded grimly, even with my 2 hands working the other parcels. 2 Hawks thought we should find Marshal Reynolds in Deadwood, Sarah explained. But he wasn't there, and Porter's men found us. 2 Hawks. Her voice faltered as the memory of that final gunshot and cheer returned. 2 Hawks created a diversion so I could warn you. This 2 Hawks, Miller said carefully. He's Lakota, and he helped you after the massacre. Why would he do that? Sarah's hand went instinctively to the medicine pouch. His family was killed. By Porter, too. He's half white, raised in both worlds. He was hunting Porter for the same reason I was, justice. She met Miller's gaze directly. He saved my life multiple times. Everything I know about surviving, about tracking, about the conspiracy, I learned from him. Something in her tone must have convinced Miller of her sincerity. He nodded once, decision made. First priority is getting word to Fort Robinson about Lieutenant Parker's treachery. If we can convince the post commander that one of his officers is compromised, he might send troops regardless of Parker's diversion. But how? Martha asked. It's a full day's ride to the fort, and if Porter's men are watching, they'll be watching for a family trying to flee or a man riding for help, Miller interrupted. Not for... He hesitated, glancing at Sarah with new consideration. Not for a child, Sarah finished, understanding dawning. Especially not one traveling like 2 Hawks taught me. Miller nodded. Could you make it to Fort Robinson? Tonight? Cross-country, avoiding roads? Sarah thought of the hardships she had already endured, months alone in her cave, the desperate journey with 2 Hawks, the night-long trek to reach the Miller farm. What was one more challenge if it meant completing the mission 2 Hawks had sacrificed himself for? I can do it, she said with quiet certainty. 2 Hawks showed me how to navigate by stars, how to move without leaving obvious tracks. I can reach the fort by morning if I leave at dusk. It's too much to ask of a child, Martha protested, though her voice lacked conviction. She, too, recognized the stakes involved. I stopped being a child the day I watched my family die. Sarah replied without self-pity. This is why I survived, to prevent it from happening to others. James Miller studied her with newfound respect. I'll write a letter to Captain Wilson, explaining everything. Between your testimony and what I can corroborate, it might be enough to prompt immediate action. And if Porter's men come before help arrives? Martha asked, voicing the fear that hung unspoken between them. Miller's expression hardened. Then we give them a fight they don't expect. I'll send word to Evans and Blackburn on the neighboring parcels. Between us we can muster 6 men with rifles. Not enough to win against Porter's gang, but enough to hold them off until the army arrives if Sarah gets through. The remainder of the day passed in careful preparation. James Miller rode to the nearby homesteads, ostensibly to borrow farming equipment, but actually to warn his neighbors of the impending attack. Martha prepared provisions for Sarah's journey and helped adjust her clothing for better protection against the bitter cold. The Miller children were told only that important visitors might arrive tomorrow, and they should be ready to hide in the root cellar at their father's signal. As dusk approached, Miller presented Sarah with his carefully drafted letter and a small compass to supplement her navigational skills. Fort Robinson lies 20 miles northwest, he instructed, tracing the route on a crude map. Keep the North Star on your right shoulder most of the journey. When you reach the White River, follow it west. You'll see the fort on the bluffs above. The river, Sarah tucked the letter securely inside her jacket, next to the medicine pouch. "If I don't make it in time," she said solemnly, "or if the captain doesn't believe me, we'll hold out as long as we can," Miller assured her. "The root cellar has a hidden access to a natural cave system. If the worst happens, Martha will get the children to safety through there." As final darkness settled over the prairie, Sarah prepared to depart. The Millers had provided her with as much practical assistance as they could: food, warmer clothing, the compass, and most importantly, the letter that might convince a skeptical army officer to take action against one of his own lieutenants. Martha embraced her at the door, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're the bravest soul I've ever encountered, Sarah Whitfield. May God protect you on this journey." James Miller's farewell was more pragmatic. "Keep to low ground when possible. Use streams to mask your trail if you think you're being followed. Don't risk the roads, even if progress seems slower cross-country." Sarah nodded, absorbing this final advice, though it largely echoed what Two Hawks had already taught her. The medicine pouch felt warm against her skin as she slipped away from the cabin, using the lengthening shadows to conceal her departure. The journey that followed tested Sarah in ways that even her months of wilderness survival had not prepared her for. The temperature dropped steadily throughout the night, the wind picking up to drive crystalline snow particles like needles against any exposed skin. Navigation proved more challenging than anticipated, cloud cover frequently obscuring the stars she relied upon for direction. Yet she persevered, drawing on every skill Two Hawks had imparted and every ounce of determination her young body could muster. When her legs threatened to give out, she remembered the Miller children who might suffer her family's fate. When cold numbed her fingers and clouded her thinking, she clutched the medicine pouch, drawing strength from its connection to Two Hawks and his sacrifice. Dawn found her stumbling along the banks of the White River, the fort visible on distant bluffs but still miles away. Sarah forced herself to maintain a steady pace, knowing that each minute might make the difference between rescue and disaster for the Miller homestead. The sun had fully cleared the horizon when she finally reached the fort's main gate. 2 sentries barred her approach, their expressions registering shock at the appearance of a half-frozen child emerging from the wilderness. "I need to see Captain Wilson," Sarah gasped, her voice hoarse from cold and exhaustion. "Immediately." "It's a matter of life and death." The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. "Captain's conducting morning inspection," one replied. "Can't be disturbed except for military business." Sarah drew herself up to her full height, summoning authority she didn't feel. "This is military business. Lieutenant Parker is involved in a conspiracy with outlaws to attack settlers. I have proof." She withdrew Miller's letter, holding it out with trembling hands. "People will die today if the captain doesn't act now." The seriousness of her manner, combined with the specific accusation against an officer, convinced the sentries to send for their sergeant. Within minutes, Sarah found herself ushered into the fort's administrative building, the letter taken for delivery to Captain Wilson. She waited in an austere anteroom, fighting to remain conscious as the warmth of the building began to thaw her, frozen extremities bringing waves of pain as circulation returned. A door opened, and a stern-faced officer in his 40s emerged, Miller's open letter in his hand and a troubled expression on his face. "I'm Captain Wilson," he announced without preamble. "This letter makes extraordinary claims about one of my officers. I need to hear directly from you what evidence supports these accusations." Drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed, Sarah recounted the entire story, from the wagon train massacre to the conversation between Hammond and Lieutenant Parker that she and Two Hawks had witnessed. She described the planned attack on the Miller homestead, the deliberate pattern of violence designed to incite conflict between settlers and Lakota, and Parker's role in ensuring troops would be unavailable when needed. The captain listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. When Sarah finished, he remained silent for several moments, weighing her testimony against what he knew of his young lieutenant. Parker requested permission yesterday to take most of our available men southeast to investigate reported Lakota movements, he said finally. They departed at dawn. Just as Hammond planned, Sarah confirmed wearily. The Miller farm will be attacked today, with no protection from the fort. Captain Wilson rose abruptly. We'll see about that. I kept 20 men in reserve, against Parker's recommendation. He called for his sergeant, issuing rapid orders. Assemble mounted patrol, full ammunition. We ride in 15 minutes, and place Corporal Hayes under arrest, pending my return. He's Parker's closest associate. He turned back to Sarah. You've shown remarkable courage, Miss Whitfield. Rest here while we organize the response. A doctor will attend to you shortly. No, Sarah protested, struggling to her feet. I'm going with you. The Millers trusted me to bring help. I need to see this through. The captain's refusal was immediate and emphatic. Absolutely not. This will be a military operation, possibly involving combat. No place for a child. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. I stopped being a child when I watched my family butchered. I survived alone for months in the wilderness. I traveled with a half-Lakota outlaw to uncover this conspiracy. I made it here from the Miller farm in a single night through terrain your soldiers would find challenging in daylight. Her voice strengthened with each statement. I've earned the right to see justice done. Something in her unwavering determination gave the captain pause. He studied her with new consideration, perhaps recognizing that this small, exhausted girl had demonstrated more courage and resilience than many of his trained soldiers. You may accompany us to the staging point near the Miller property, he conceded finally, but you will remain there with the rear guard while we engage any hostiles. It was a compromise Sarah could accept. She nodded gratefully, gathering her remaining strength for this final push. The Army patrol rode hard, taking the most direct route to the Miller homestead, while Sarah clung to the saddle of a gentle mare assigned to her care. Despite her exhaustion, she remained alert, scanning the horizon for any sign that they might be too late. They crested a low rise overlooking the Miller property shortly after midday. The scene below froze Sarah's blood. 8 riders were approaching the farmhouse from different directions, their intent clearly hostile. James Miller and his neighbors had taken defensive positions, rifles visible at windows and from behind. Improvised barriers, just in time, Captain Wilson muttered. He issued rapid orders, deploying his men to encircle Porter's gang before they could fully engage the defenders. The military intervention was swift and decisive. Caught between the unexpected Army patrol and the determined homesteaders, Porter's men quickly recognized their untenable position. Several surrendered immediately. Others, including Porter himself, attempted to flee but were cut off by mounted soldiers who had circled behind them. From her position with the rear guard, Sarah watched as Marcus Porter, the man whose greed and cruelty had orchestrated her family's murder, was dragged from his horse and secured in iron manacles, his scarred face contorted with rage as he realized the extent of his defeat. The aftermath unfolded with military efficiency. Porter and his captured men were secured for transport back to Fort Robinson. Captain Wilson dispatched riders to intercept Lieutenant Parker's patrol and place him under arrest. James Miller and his neighbors emerged from their defensive positions, astonished at their narrow escape. Through it all, Sarah observed with strange detachment, as if watching events unfold from a great distance. The mission that had driven her forward through unimaginable hardship was completed. Justice for her. Family was set in motion. The conspiracy that had claimed so many lives was exposed, yet a profound emptiness remained where that driving purpose had been. What came next for a child who had lost everything, who had walked between worlds, who had aged years in mere months, as She stood alone on the rise, uncertain of her place in the celebrations below. A commotion among the soldiers caught her attention. They were bringing forward a final prisoner, captured attempting to circle behind the army patrol during the confrontation. Sarah's heart nearly stopped as she recognized the figure limping between two soldiers, bruised, bloodied, but unmistakably alive. Two hawks. She ran down the slope, heedless of protocol or caution, tears streaming freely for the first time since leaving Deadwood. The soldiers moved to block her approach to the prisoner, but Captain Wilson, witnessing her reaction, waved them aside. "Two hawks!" Sarah reached him, checking herself just short of an embrace as she noted his bound hands and numerous injuries. "I thought you were dead." I heard the shots, the cheering. A ghost of a smile touched Two Hawks' battered face. Porters. Men had poor shots in darkness, wounded only. His eyes, despite the pain evident in them, held a quiet pride as he regarded her. "You completed the mission, brought help, saved lives." "Miss Whitfield," Captain Wilson interrupted, approaching, with newfound respect in his manner. "You know this man?" Sarah straightened, her voice firm as she faced the captain. "This is Two Hawks. He saved my life after the Wagon train massacre. He taught me how to survive. He helped me uncover Porter's conspiracy. Everything I told you, who came from our work together." She gestured toward the captured raiders. "He deserves recognition, not imprisonment." The captain thoughtfully studied Two Hawks. The territorial authorities will have questions. His status as half Lakota complicates matters, especially given current tensions. "Then I'll speak for him," Sarah declared without hesitation. "To the marshal, to the governor, to the president himself if necessary. Two Hawks is a hero. Without him, Porter would have succeeded again and again." Two Hawks' expression remained stoic, but his eyes conveyed profound gratitude for her unwavering advocacy. Captain Wilson, perhaps recognizing the extraordinary bond between this unlikely pair, signaled for his men to remove Two Hawks' bindings. "He remains in military custody for now," the captain clarified, "but as a protected witness, not a prisoner." In the days that followed, Sarah's prediction proved accurate. Marshal Reynolds, upon his return to the territory, took personal interest in the case. Her testimony, combined with evidence recovered from Porter's headquarters and Lieutenant Parker's subsequent confession, exposed the full extent of the conspiracy. Several territorial officials, including Hammond, were arrested. Porter and his men faced federal charges for multiple murders, with convictions virtually assured. The question of Sarah's future remained unresolved until a surprising intervention from James Miller. Having learned of her connection to his former correspondent Thomas Whitfield and witnessing firsthand her extraordinary character, he approached her with an unexpected proposal. "Martha and I have discussed this at length," he explained, as they sat in Marshal Reynolds' office in Deadwood. "We would be honored if you would consider making your home with us, not as a servant or hired help, but as family." Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face, for Miller continued earnestly, "Your father was a good man who would have been our neighbor and friend. Taking in his daughter seems the least we can do to honor his memory." The offer was genuine and generous. The Millers represented the stable family life that had been violently taken from her. Their children had already formed an attachment to the brave girl who had saved them. Yet Sarah found herself hesitating, her hand going instinctively to the medicine pouch she still wore. "What about Two Hawks?" she asked, voicing the concern that overshadowed all others. "What will happen to him?" Marshal Reynolds, who had been quietly observing the exchange, cleared his throat. "The territorial governor is eager to make amends for the corruption in his administration. Two Hawks has been officially pardoned for any previous questionable activities. As a key witness in the upcoming trials, he'll be under federal protection for some time. And after that, Sarah pressed. "He's a man of two worlds," Reynolds acknowledged, "neither of which has treated him particularly well. His future remains his choice." Later that day, Sarah visited Two Hawks in his comfortable but guarded room at Deadwood's Hotel. His physical recovery was progressing well, though a new scar across his cheek would join the collection that marked his hard life. "The Millers have offered to take me in," she told him, settling cross-legged on the floor in the Lakota manner he had taught her. "They're good people. They would give me a normal life again." Two Hawks nodded, unsurprised. "Good family, good future for the young one, but it doesn't feel right," Sarah admitted, the confession pouring out despite her attempts to remain composed. "Living in a settler's house, forgetting everything that happened, everything you taught me. Going back to being just a white child after walking between worlds." For a long moment, Two Hawks was silent, his dark eyes thoughtful as he considered her words. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the same quiet authority that had guided her through wilderness and danger. "When I found you in that cave," he said slowly, "you were a settler child trying to survive in Lakota territory. Now you are something new, not fully of white world, not of the Lakota world. Like me." His gaze met hers directly. "The path between worlds is difficult, lonely sometimes, but those who walk it may build bridges others cannot see." Sarah understood the profound truth in his observation. She had been irrevocably changed by her experiences. Returning to a purely settler existence would require burying part of herself, the part that had learned to move silently through forests, to read the language of the land, to respect the interconnectedness of all living things. "What will you do?" she asked, "when the trials are over?" "Return to Mother's people for a time," Two Hawks replied. "Then perhaps find a place where both sides of my blood can live in peace." He studied her with unexpected tenderness. "Such a place might welcome a young one who also carries two worlds in her heart." The implied invitation hung between them, not an immediate alternative to the Miller's offer, but a future possibility, a door left open when Sarah was ready to choose her own path. 3 weeks later, Sarah Whitfield stood on the porch of the Miller farmhouse, watching a lone rider approach from the north. The winter had begun to release its grip on the prairie, patches of green emerging from beneath melting snow. Inside, Martha prepared the evening meal, while James tended to the livestock. Their children played in the yard, pausing occasionally to include Sarah in their games. The Millers had proven true to their word, treating her with kindness and respect, allowing her the space to heal from her ordeal while gradually integrating her into their family routines. They asked nothing of her past that she wasn't willing to share, and accepted her occasional need for solitude without question. Two Hawks dismounted at the edge of the property, respecting the boundary. He had visited several times since the Abe trials began, always maintaining a respectful distance from the house itself, aware of the complicated feelings his presence might evoke in the settler community. Sarah walked out to meet him, the medicine pouch visible around her neck, the one gift from her time with him that she refused to set aside despite its incongruity with her new life. "The trial goes well," Two Hawks reported without preamble. "Porter sentenced to hang, Hammond and others to prison. Lieutenant Parker turned witness, received lesser punishment." Sarah nodded, satisfaction rather than joy filling her at this confirmation that justice would be served. "When will you leave for the reservation?" she asked, knowing his testimony had concluded the previous week. "Tomorrow. Tribal elders await news of what happened." He hesitated, then added, "We'll return when winter comes again. By then, you decide where you belong." The simple statement acknowledged what both had recognized but never directly discussed, that Sarah's placement with the Millers was temporary, a necessary stage in her healing and growth, but not necessarily her final destination. "I'll be waiting," she promised, her young voice carrying the gravity of an oath. As Two Hawks mounted his horse and rode toward the northern horizon, Sarah remained watching until he disappeared from view. The medicine pouch warmed against her skin, a reminder of all she had endured and all she had become. Behind her lay the security of the Miller home, the chance to reclaim some semblance of normal childhood, to grow within the protective embrace of a loving family. Ahead lay the unknown path Two Hawks had shown her, the difficult but vital journey of one who walks between worlds, building bridges that others might someday cross. For now, it was enough to stand at this crossroads, honoring both directions while gathering strength for the choice that would eventually come. Sarah Whitfield turned back toward the farmhouse, where lamplight now glowed in the gathering dusk. She walked with the balanced step Two Hawks had taught her, her small shoulders straight beneath the weight of experience no child should bear, yet carried with a dignity beyond her years. She was no longer merely a survivor of tragedy, but a keeper of truth, a witness to both humanity's darkest capacities and its most unexpected courage. Whatever path she ultimately chose, that purpose would remain her compass, guiding her toward a future where the worlds that had collided so violently in her young life might someday find a measure of healing through understanding. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.